Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And with this one, I wanted to bring you my 9.1.5 Shadowlands 2v2 competitive tier list. 2v2 is actually a ton of fun at the moment. I've been enjoying it. Probably is my favorite bracket right now. So if you're looking to pick a specialization based on how meta it is and how competitive it is in this bracket, you want to look to excel and climb to the top of the ladder, get some of those gear unlocks and transmog unlocks, and just have the prestige of being super high ranked, then this is going to be a great list for you. And let's just get started. We've broken it down into S+. This means that this specialization is popular, super fun to play, has an insane amount of comp diversity, so you'll have tons of options to climb the ladder. S means that it might fall short of that comp diversity, might be a little bit more limited, but it is still easily able to get to the highest points of the ladder. A means it might be a bit more of a struggle. You may have a little bit of a tougher time in LFG due to the lack of popularity of the spec, but it doesn't mean that its strength is lacking. It's still strong. B means that its popularity is low and that also its strength is slightly low, but you could make it work. C means that its popularity is basically non-existent. You may struggle to find groups with it in LFG. It really only has a couple of gimmicks going for it. It's very limited. While I do think you can actually climb with pretty much any spec in the game in 2v2 at the moment, once you do get to the highest level, these specs I think start to fall behind the rest of them. But if you're only looking for, the range of 0 to 2100, maybe even 2400, all of these specs can do that. This really starts to hamper down when you get above that point. So let's just get started. The first one is super easy. We've got Arms Warrior. We don't really need to think about this at all. Super fun spec to play, very powerful, has an amazing amount of utility, has an amazing amount of comp diversity, can play with pretty much any healer, but of course, running with the Resto Druid is going to be your most powerful, just being so passively durable and able to just chunk out massive amounts of damage is what enables this specialization, playing with healers to do so extraordinarily well. If you want more aggression, you can play the Resto Shaman. If you want more defense and more standard play at the highest level of the ladder, then you're going to want to play with a Druid. You can play with a priest, but you may start to struggle when you shift away from the druid or the shaman with this spec particularly. You may want to try some double DPS for fun, something like a ret paladin. That can be a great kind of newbie rating stomping comp with the double melee DPS with the big one shot, but I think it starts to lose a bit of steam the higher that you go. Now the next specialization is Assassination Rogue. I don't really see this spec nearly as frequently as Subtlety at the moment. Subtlety seems to be taking to center stage when it comes to the rogue specializations. It's still pretty straightforward specialization, just doing a tremendous amount of single target damage, still has great one-shot burst damage, fits well into the dampening portion of the meta. You can play with a priest. I would recommend a disciplined priest, and you're just going to be focusing on just rampaging out a ton of constant damage, overwhelming your target, and trying to make it unrecoverable. But you will be limited. I don't think you're as desirable as Subtlety for some of the other comps like double DPS, like Rogue Mage. You're going to be pretty restricted to just playing with a healer. I don't think that you are quite as powerful as the Warrior, so based under those limitations, I think that you fall more into the A tier. You are strong. You can definitely excel at the top of the ladder, playing with Shaman Healer or Discipline Priest Healer for overwhelming purge and pressure damage, but you're just missing a little bit of the edge. You're also a little bit less popular at the moment, at least, over the other specializations of Rogue. Enhancement Shaman, this was a really tough one because at the lower rating, your ability to heal is a great buddy booster. So if you're playing with a friend who's new to the game, doesn't know what's really going on, you can carry really hard at that lower rating. But when you get to the top end of the ladder, it starts to become more predictable how your damage works. You start to get controlled a little bit more. You're not able to connect everything that you need to win, and you can kind of just get dampened by your opponents or just overwhelmed by the pressure of these other mortal wound classes with how high dampening can get. So this might be a brutal ranking for Enhance in 2v2, right? Because at the lower end of the ladder, it can definitely stomp and you will carry. And again, I think you could easily get to 2400 with this specialization. But if you were to sign up in a tournament, if you were going to play at the highest possible point, I think it's a spec that you probably see a little bit less. Super fun spec to play. You can play a lot of these double DPS hybrid comps like Ret Enhance or Feral Enhance. But once you get to the highest level of play, I think it falls really far behind. So this might be brutal. I'm sorry, Enhancement Shaman players, but I did it. I'm putting you down there on the bottom for the competitive aspect of the game in 2v2. Feral Druid, on the other hand, you are very versatile. You are very flexible. You have a ton of options with double DPS compositions. You can play with mages. You can play with hunters. You can play with healers. I recommend playing with healers, something maybe like Holy Priest, setting up double stun locks, and you can play Convoke the Spirits even in these types of compositions to burst down a target rapidly. You are going to love playing this specialization. It is incredibly competitive with an insane amount of options. Definitely an S+ tier in the 2v2. Now moving into Frost Death Knight. While I have some videos uploaded myself for Frost Death Knight, I think there's got to be a reason why it's not getting as much love, right? And I think it's because players often look towards the exact top of the ladder and try and only play those things, even if their ranking isn't at that point. You can make this spec work for sure, but you may want to consider it once you get to the top end that your setups, much like the Enhancement Shaman, become much more predictable. And the players are going to start to know how to trade around your Death Grip goes with their trinkets and their defensives. And if you're fighting any sort of ranged DPS like mages, you can find it tough to get the targets clumped up together like you need them to be to get your massive burst damage out. With dampening starting so soon, your self-sustainability is also going to be lowered quite a lot. I think Frost Death Knight, do I want to give it the brutality that I just did Enhancement Shaman? I wanted to try and spread the specs out a little bit more distinctly towards the top end of the ladder, so I might have to give it a harsh rating on this tier list. I'm really debating it. Is it a cold winter? Do we want to put it on B or C? That's kind of what I'm feeling right now for Frost Death Knight in terms of the top end of the ladder. Possibly a bit better than Enhance, but you also don't have the flexibility of Enhance, so it would be a little bit strange to put it any higher than Enhance. We're going to have to give it the brutality. We'll have to give it the brutality in 2s at the moment. Fury Warrior, you're not an arms warrior. Your damage burst windows are a lot less frequent. Unfortunately, while you are more viable in 2v2, it just seems like you're missing something. I don't know what it is about Fury Warrior, but I feel like I've only lost to one Fury Warrior, and it was a Worgen, of course. And they one-shot me with some sort of Night Fae Aftershock Shockwave. But then after that, I've never lost to a Fury Warrior, so it's really cheesy. You're going to feel probably pretty limited at the highest end of the ladder. Now, I've seen at the lower end, you can play almost anything, right? But at the highest end, I think Fury Warrior, we're going to have to give the brutality. Yeah, we have to, right? Because it's only fair with the other specs down there right now. I think that's where it's going to end up going. Now, Demon Hunter might be a bit of surprising ranking here because Demon Hunter, I think a lot of people consider not to be that great, but I have seen a few Demon Hunter healers, especially now Demon Hunters moving over to Necro Lord for their survivability improvements. If you play with a Druid in that build, you can play with a Resto Shaman in that build, you are going to feel pretty strong, but you'll be limited in that regard, much like the Assassination Rogue. So I think it makes sense to put Demon Hunter onto the A tier, where you're strong but limited. And you're certainly capable at the highest level of the ladder. You're just not going to have the same amount of popularity as the Arms or the Feral, or the comp flexibility of the Arms or the Feral at the highest end. Outlaw Rogue, actually doing surprisingly better in 2s, mostly because of its insanely low cooldown evasion. So you can deal with a lot of these melee attackers quite well, but you'll still often fall behind. I've watched a lot of streams of people trying to play Outlaw Rogue, and they fight into the Warriors, and they just come a little bit short. It feels like they've got a fighting chance, and right at the end, they aren't able to at the highest level of play. So for me, Outlaw is probably strong but limited, much like the Assassination Rogue. I think that it's going to likely end up on about the same tier. Retribution Paladin, this is a strong, flexible spec. You're not as great in the healer DPS category as something like Arms or Feral, but in double DPS, you are amazing. This is a really tough spec for me to put on. I'm not sure to put on S+ or S, honestly, because I think not being able to run healer DPS with how amazing healer DPS is, but at the same time, you can run so many things. I think we're going to have to put it up here. If you're playing red at the absolute highest level, you can be almost borderline unkillable, and you can support a ton of other specs in the game. You can run things like Mage Ret. You could probably run Boomkin Ret, Feral Ret. Like, you can play anything. I think it makes sense to throw Ret there up onto the S+ tier. Now, Subtlety, this spec has started to come back from the dead in this patch, with a bunch of the PvP changes being reverted from it previously, and now Covenant abilities that are actually useful in PvP for them specifically. Rogue Mage is absolutely insane, but also so is Holy Priest Subtlety Rogue, being able to stun multiple targets and then blast them down. I think that Subtlety Rogue has really jumped up a lot at the moment in competitive 2v2, and I feel confident putting it up here onto the S tier. Now, for Survival Hunter, this is another spec that's just, there's not a lot of people playing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It also is directly competing with BM, which is probably the best 2v2 spec in the game, if with hands down, no doubt. But it doesn't mean that Survival is necessarily bad on its own. Survival is still a great spec to play and still very competitive. Obviously running with the healer DPS builds, which you can also play with Feral Druids, possibly Rets. I haven't seen a lot of Rets at the absolute highest level, but you could still play Survival if you'd like to. Debating right now between S and A tier because you're strong, but you're going to be limited and your popularity is a little bit lower. So I think it might make more sense to put it up here onto the A tier at the moment. And it's very close to S. But again, because BM is just outshining you so much at the moment, you may have a lot of people coming at you like, just go BM, dude, and then we can push higher. So it's strong. You can play it at the highest end of the level of the ladder, but I don't think it's the S+. Now, Unholy DK, this is one that's been bouncing around for a bit. There's really only one person I see still actually committed to playing the Unholy DK. A lot of other DK players have switched over to Warriors. So does that mean that it's fallen short? I've seen the Priest Death Knight composition being the one that's kind of pushing towards the higher end of the ladder. It feels spooky to fight at times, but I'm struggling to give it a super high ranking. Right now at the moment, I'm jumping between a high B and a low A. So maybe it'll be the spec that takes up the B category here. It's doing a lot better again. But once you get up to the absolute highest level of play, super competitive, I think that it's going to start to lose out to some of the other specializations. But you could more than easily get 2400 with this specialization, still do really well with it. But if it were down to a tournament, you were going to try and win a tournament, I wouldn't put my money on it, right? So I think it's going to fall a little bit short. And that's why this list is a little bit more harsh than a lot of other lists, because these specs are still great at their lower ratings. I think maybe Fury Warrior and Frost Death Knight might be the only ones that I would kind of be a little bit more worried about if you want to lock yourself into them for the long term in 2v2. And now finally, Windwalker Monk. Now, Windwalker with Holy Priest, if you're coordinated with your Chastise stuns to set up the Storm, Earth, and Fire of the Windwalker, is going to be absolutely amazing. If you're running with the Resto Druid, same type of deal. You do also have the option to run with some of the hybrid melee DPS and run double DPS, so you're very popular, super competitive, have a ton of options. Pretty easy, just knock out of the park up here to the S+. And we've got our list here. We got Arms, Feral, Ret, and Windwalker on S+, Subtlety Rogue on S, Assassination, Demon Hunter, Outlaw, Survival on A, Unholy on B. It's high B, right? It's almost going into A. Enhancement on a high C, almost going into B. Frost on a high C, almost going into B. Fury on a mid C, probably almost a low C. For Fury. And this is my competitive 2v2 list right now for Shadowlands 9.1.5. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave it with a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts. Do you think I was too harsh on some of these specs? Remember, it's from my opinion, from gathering data, from watching streams, from playing myself on the ladder. I tried to compile it into a productive list to try and help people make their choice if they're really committed at this bracket and they want to try and get as high as they can. I think that these specs will give you the best shot. And also, if you're looking at something other than those specs, how much of a chance would it really have of getting to the absolute pinnacle of the ladder? And that was the main purpose of the list. So it's not meant to be me hating on these specs. I think that all these specs are capable, especially from the 0 to 2400 rating, which is a lot of the ladder, right? That's like 99% of the ladder. It's like the 1% of the 1% pushing at the top is where this list starts to, I think, to become more apparent. Not down there, not in that lower ranking. All these other specs are great in that range. Maybe they could be improved a little bit, right? But they're still going to be great in that range if you want to pick them up and play. And other than that, if you want to subscribe to the channel, I'm updating tier lists, news, entertainment, education. I want to be a great resource for you guys to be able to enhance your experience with World of Warcraft. So hitting that subscribe button helps me out greatly. And if you'd like to follow me live on twitch.tv/Supatease, I'm streaming every day at 11 a.m. PST. We're doing viewer games. I've already helped over 50 people get to their desired ratings. And we also do Battlegrounds. So if you want to get some honor farm and try and level up your gear, I know you're all got to level up your gear, then that's going to be a great place to be. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.